wrapped up in the things you are here to fulfill. Whatever you choose for a career path, remember the struggles along the way are only meant to shape you for your purpose.
Welcome to In Bloom. I am your host, Mikaela Richmond, and this is a Pro Humanity podcast.
In today's episode, I have on Ryan Ferguson. I have been trying to get Ryan on for probably a month straight. Just all kinds of life events. You had a child. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, first, welcome onto the podcast.
I'm excited to be here. Yeah, thanks for being so flexible. I'm happy we finally found the time to get on though.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm excited to talk to you. So first, let's start. Give a little bit of a background on yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What do you like to do?
Yeah, so I'm Ryan Ferguson. I'm the director of the bootcamp experience at Praxis. I'm also an alum of the Praxis program and a host of a podcast called The World Wanders, which my wife and I run and I've been doing for 7 years about our kind of adventures around the world and interviewing interesting people who are doing kind of self-directed things that relate to travel. And yeah, that's kind of what I do today. I guess my brief version of my story would be I was kind of on a very typical conveyor belt path, went to university, did 4 years in a business degree, started my life in my career in accounting. And after a couple of years was like, this is not for me. Just doing kind of menial bookkeeping style tasks in a big company was like, this is not my thing. And so my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, we both kind of sold all our possessions and did the very stereotypical, we're going backpacking, and went to South America for 6 months, and had a really really life-changing experience, which again sounds kind of stereotypical, but just rethought the ways we wanted to do things. Ended up moving to a different city. And completely changing my career, becoming a lot more entrepreneurial, and it's kind of eventually led up to today.
That's amazing. Okay, so whenever y'all left, usually your plan whenever you leave or whenever you start something is not what it ends up becoming. So what was your initial idea? What did you think y'all were going to do? What did you think you were signing up for?
When we left for that trip, honestly, we didn't have much of a plan. It was kind of one of those positions where just really gotten into a life funk and was like, I don't know what I need to do, but I know I need to leave. And so, we bought one-way tickets to Colombia. I kind of feel like I knew at that time, I don't want to come back we were living in Calgary, Alberta at the time. I was like, I don't want to come back here after. But didn't really know. And then, just kind of as the months went on, started thinking about what else could we do? And it's one of the really cool things about travel is you get so far out of your typical context. So whereas at home, you meet people who work in similar industries, who have kind of similar socioeconomic backgrounds, traveling, you're meeting people who work as English teachers in China or people who work on safaris in South Africa, stuff like that. So it really starts opening your perspective. And so kind of somewhere along the way, we both figured out hey, we want to do something different. We don't want to go home and just get into the same rhythm, the same kind of lifestyle. And so our plan was hey, we're going to go live in a mountain town in Alberta for a couple months over the summer and then get our teaching English certifications and then move somewhere in Asia, work as English teachers and use that as a launching pad to travel, which that never happened. And also that was where the idea for the podcast was born. So we started that kind of when we got home and ended up taking a completely different route, but kind of locking in on that idea of not living based off what you think other people want you to do. Just kind of really staying true to what we wanted to do and the direction we wanted to take.
So how did that develop? How did that understanding of what you actually wanted to do develop?
Yeah, it starts with the smallest things. I think we have this voice in, our hearts and our heads that is kind of pointing us a direction. And by the time you get to 24 and you've been ignoring it for that many years, it's still kind of there, but it's more subtle. And so kind of coming back, I was like, okay, what are the things I like to do right now? So I like to travel. I know that. I'm really interested in podcasts. I know that. I've always wanted to be a cook. When I think back to like my childhood, one of the first things I wanted to do was like, maybe I could be a chef one day. And I also had developed an interest in coffee, and being a barista seemed like something, again, that was like skillful and interesting. And so we moved back, and I was like, I want to live somewhere cool, somewhere interesting. And so we picked like a town that was very like lifestyle focused, started a podcast. And then also I was like, well, I either want to be a barista or a cook. And so I started out working at a cafe, and then eventually made the move back to working in a kitchen as a cook, and then eventually to a server somewhere else once I figured out that cooking in a restaurant was not my thing. And then also just tried to live a life that was very focused on the things we like to do in the moment. I think that I'd kind of grown up with this vision of like, you do what you're supposed to do now so that you can do what you're supposed to do after, and never really taking that time to figure out what it is you're actually really, the thing that makes you feel alive, which is something we talk about a lot at Praxis. But for me at that moment, the things that I'd found that made me feel alive were travel, learning new things. And so I just kind of focused on that. And then over time, as you start doing that stuff you like, that voice gets more, doesn't necessarily get louder, but you start to understand of like, the thing was telling me to write a book for all these years. And then I started doing that. I didn't actually like it or whatever. And you're on to the next one after that.
I love that. Okay, so you kind of mentioned a little bit about this. You were kind of saying that you went from, this very planned out path. I do this now to get to XYZ place later. But just to like dial in a little bit deeper onto that, you were an accountant. Like that usually is a path that people choose because it's financially stable most of the time. It's a very financially stable path. It's very predictable in not a bad way, but it is predictable. And then you get to this point where you are okay being a barista. So like within that period, so many of your values had to have changed, right? Or like, how did that happen, and what did they shift to and from?
Yeah. So I wasn't an accountant. I'd done my degree in finance and then was working in like the accounting office of a bigger company. So I think if I'd gone, I had been thinking that was one of those points of like inflection where I was like, maybe I should go get my like CPA and just kind of commit to doing this. But yeah, I think for me, just kind of unconsciously growing up, had picked up the values that were going on around me, which were very much kind of status oriented, especially around like finance. Like making a lot of money means you're like a good person, that you're succeeding in life. And so it's interesting because like I came out of college and felt like I ran into maybe a little bit of a wall, something that challenged that belief system, because so Alberta is like the home of the oil industry in Canada. And so kind of coming out, I didn't get a job at an oil company, which meant that I was making probably like 25% less money than a lot of people I knew. I was still like had a very good salary that a ton of people would be excited about, but in my kind of competitive status driven mind, I was like, this isn't winning. I'm losing here. And so, yeah, I think over that time away, I think just kind of connecting with kind of how truly I wasn't living in line with I wasn't enjoying my life was basically the core part of it. And I wasn't like looking back like, hey, I'm proud of myself, the way I'm acting, the way I'm living. And so maybe made like the extreme turn the other way of like, I don't want to work for anybody else. I only want to work for myself. And kind of swung that pendulum that direction. But it was interesting going back. So yeah, moving back to Canada, we moved to a place that's only like an hour and a half away from the city I used to live in. And remember having, at times I was working in a popular cafe, and it's like a tourist town. So a lot of people from the city come on weekends, and a few times seeing friends come into the cafe. And it was like, there's still a part of your brain that like, are people going to think I'm a failure because I'm working in a cafe? When the reality was like, I was happier than ever, feeling very healthy, feeling very alive. Like I would leave work and go hiking or go do stuff with friends, and just was really enjoying my life. And one of the other things, like, don't tell anybody, but when you're working in service and you're getting a lot of tips, you're taking home a lot more cash. So even though like nominally your salary is significantly lower, you're actually not making too much less money, especially in Canada at that time where, the cost of labor was quite high. So yeah, I think for me, it was just a reassessment of like what life's really about, and like in more of an immature view, thinking, life's about, and probably a lower self-esteem view as well, where life's about other people thinking highly of you because you've got a high status job, you're making lots of money, whatever you're doing, all those other things, to like, what do I actually like doing? And if it's like, I go to work and I feel, energized and alive, versus I go to work, I make more money, but I feel kind of bored out of my skull. That's what matters to me. And although that voice is still always in the back of your head, probably saying like, people are going to think this of you because you're here, type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I can fully relate. It was a big shift between the whole, this is what a good life is supposed to look like, and wait, actually I can define my own idea of a good life. And it is highly based on the present moment. Like it's whenever I was talking to Silas in one of the earlier episodes, he was like, what's the point in investing in a future if the future never comes? Like if you can invest in the future while you're enjoying the present, that's the ideal state to be in.
Yeah, I think something for me around the travel experience, which like, it's interesting as you move through lives, because you'll be in a certain phase where like, when you're that 21 years old, travel is cool. And then maybe you get to 25 and people are doing things and they're like, oh, it's like so stereotypical, so basic of people to want to go do this thing. And it's always evolving, right? As technology changes, the way experiences change. So I was lucky to do it at a time where like going somewhere meant like disconnecting in a way, like you were disconnected from your social circle. You kind of became bored in a way, but really it was like for the first time in my life, living a life where I woke up in the morning and was like, what do I want to do today? But was never a question I'd asked myself previously. Like I went to school, I went to university, I went to work. And after doing that, I feel like everyone needs to go through a phase of just like boredom for like a solid month without distractions, because now it's so easy to just fall into like a Netflix hole or video games, whatever. But to actually truly be just kind of sitting with yourself for a month or so, and then layers start to come off and you start to see that vision of like, okay, I'm excited about doing something. And as well, to get a chance to do, sometimes we built these things up in our head. So like travel, I think, is a really common one of like, it's, this would be perfect if I could just do this. And then you do it and you're like, hey, it's not perfect. And you learn other things that are important to you along the way.
I love that. So you mentioned this, like you kind of alluded to it, the idea of an identity shift. Like you go into these situations that you've never been in before, and you almost expand your understanding of self because you see yourself in different situations that you've never seen yourself in before. How did your identity or like understanding of who you were as an individual shift throughout these periods of novelty, almost like new experiences?
Yeah, I think it's like one of these things that happens like going upstairs or whatever. It's funny kind of looking back now. I remember, so I grew up in British Columbia in Canada, which is like the furthermost west province. And then I went to school in Alberta, which is the next one over, on the other side of the Rocky Mountains. And so I was like a fan of the Vancouver Canucks. And I was like, okay, I'm like going to Alberta. I'm going to get like my Canucks hat. And like, when you're young, you kind of build your identity on these like very, I don't know if you necessarily call it's like simple things. It's not necessarily surface level things, but it's like, I'm from this part of the world. This is how I build my identity. And so I think travel is really cool because it puts you in so many different contexts in such a short period of time. And again, it's like, you can go traveling and not do that, because if you go and you stay at hotels and like you take nice tours and everyone around you is from the same place you're from, then that's not going to happen. But what we were doing, we were staying at different hostels, taking buses all around. that type of thing. So every night you're meeting people at hostels from different countries with different jobs, different experiences, and you're kind of, yeah, you notice. I remember one early thing for us right after college, actually, we took a trip and we went to Europe. I remember meeting people and people judging you based off where you're from. Like people would say things like, oh, we thought you were from the States. And that means like they were thinking a certain thing of us until they realized we were Canadian, and now they think another thing of us. And you're like, well, that's kind of stupid, that people would be so, I don't know, have such like a basic level of understanding of how people are. And so, yeah, there's that. And then also noticing the way you judge other people. So like having moments in like a hostel where like someone comes in, and we were staying in like dorm rooms and stuff because that was the cheapest way to do it. And you're like, oh, I notice like I judge this person, and maybe like dismissing, like this isn't someone who I'm going to want to associate with. And then you end up talking to them and you're like, really interested in them. And so you kind of notice, hey, I was judging this person because of, the way they looked, the way they dressed, the way they talked, whatever it might be. And kind of vice versa, where someone comes in, you're like, oh, this person seems cool. And then you talk to them and you're like, no, this person's not cool at all. So yeah, you start under getting a kind of deeper, more nuanced understanding of how you think of yourself as well. Because it's interesting, because you can get into situations where you start thinking of yourself as like, I'm the Canadian person. And then like you're staying somewhere where there's a bunch of Canadian people. And then you're like, well, who am I now? And then as life goes on, maybe you find a new interest and you're like, I'm the libertarian person. And something I've always found funny is whenever you get like closer to a group of people who share the same kind of thing, you find more division. Like if you ever go to like a libertarian conference, it's like everyone's arguing about everything, and it's like fun and interesting, but it's like, oh no, you're a minarchist and I'm a voluntarist and I'm an anarcho-capitalist. And so we're going to have this big argument about it, because we're always, we see ourselves through our commonalities with other people, but we also see ourselves through our differences. And so I think it's kind of interesting just going through and experiencing that in so many different situations, because it's kind of like you get to live life on fast forward, because every couple of days you're meeting a whole new segment of people, and you're having way more experiences than you would if you're just at home going to work each day.
Why do you think, you brought up the fact that like if you're in a group of people that are very similar to you, usually you'll have more disagreements. Why do you think we do that? Is it like boredom? Is it like why?
That's a really good question. I think one, I don't think there's necessarily something wrong with having disagreements. Like having conversations where you're having like an in-depth argument with someone can be some of the most engaging things. I do think like as humans, we kind of have this need to be part of a group, but need to see ourselves as unique and special within that group. And maybe this is something that's more so like a modern problem with like, everyone growing up being told they're special. But yeah, it's like, hey, I need to kind of establish, yes, I'm a part of the group, but once I'm in the group, it's like, okay, I need to know I'm unique, I'm special, because I need to have a sense of security within this group. And so that kind of seems like the root of it, at least.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So my thing, whenever it comes to travel, and I've been kind of slowly getting out of this, but this is very common, is fear. Why? Like, I mean, I guess I understand why we fear things, but after going through it all and experiencing so many amazing things, first off, what kind of advice would you give people who fear the idea of travel, the scary things? And then I'll ask a follow-up.
Yeah. When you mean like the fear, scary things, like you mean the idea of like, hey, going to, I don't know, El Salvador seems cool, but they've got a high crime rate? Or do you mean just more so like the meta level, like, oh, I feel like afraid of not being in like my comfortable normal circumstances?
I think it's like at the heart, it's probably the meta level. Like I'm comfortable where I'm at. Like there could be bad things that would happen to me here. But at the same time, yeah, the whole El Salvador thing, so I actually went on a mission trip to El Salvador. It was really funny. Um, and like before that, my mom was like, oh, it's going to be scary. And I had all of these preconceptions of what it was going to be like. And there's a level in which caution is good, like a level in which, okay, don't dress a certain way, don't act a certain way, don't make yourself a target or go with people that you don't know. um, but then there's also a certain level that requires openness, like to experience the things that you experience, to be at a hostel and to meet people every single night. You have to be extremely open to these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's super cliche as well, but like life is happening when you're like at the edges of your comfort zone, and kind of breaking out. And that's something that's not natural to us as humans, right? We want to be within our comfort zone because that's what feels comfortable. Um, and so, yeah, with travel, I think it's a great context for getting out of your comfort zone. I think as technology advances and the world, we're developing kind of like a monoculture. Um, it becomes easier to not leave your comfort zone while also traveling, because I can go, for example, just down the road from here in Mexico, there's a Starbucks, there's a Buffalo Wild Wings across the street. Uh, I can be on Instagram with my friends, all that type of stuff. Um, but yeah, kind of starting to travel, I think is awesome because it puts you in a context where it's a little bit easier to get out of your comfort zone and realize like, hey, I'm out here and things are going well. Um, and then, yeah, when it comes to more of the practical side of things, I think the way we live with like media, it really distorts our ability to understand places other than where we're from. I remember on our podcast, we interviewed a guy who biked from Canada to Argentina, and then he eventually biked from South Africa. I don't know if he got all the way to Europe because COVID kind of ran in and then he had to move somewhere else, but was going to bike from Africa, tip of Southern Africa, all the way up to Europe as well. But it was interesting. He was talking about how, so he leaves Canada, cruises down the States, everything's going well, gets into like Texas and starts heading towards Mexico. And as he gets closer and closer to Mexico, everyone starts telling him like, oh, like you should really be, you know, careful, maybe better not to do it. It's so dangerous across the border. So like as he gets closer to Mexico, people are telling him like, God, watch out, because like the only news that travels across is the bad news. Like we're not getting news reports of, couple has a lovely road trip. I remember before we went to the Philippines, a couple of Canadian people had been in one of the areas that's controlled by like a terrorist group in the Philippines, and Canadian people had been beheaded. And so that's like the only news my parents had gotten out of the Philippines, right? Like they're not hearing about everyone who's having a good time. The only thing they had heard recently was like Canadians beheaded in the Philippines. But then you kind of look into it and it's like, hey, they're in an area which people are explicitly told don't travel to. Not to diminish the sadness of that or the fact that there are bad things that are happening to people, but we kind of get this bubble of like, I think especially growing up in the States where you're like, this is the spot, like everyone wants to be here, this is the place I want to be. In Canada, growing up in a small town in Canada especially, you kind of have this sense of like the world is out there, like there's no movies made about where I'm from, like it's in like America, or like I see sporting events, I see Wimbledon, whatever, like the world's out there, I need to go explore it. I think sometimes, if you're from the States, for example, or maybe some European countries, you can feel like this is the best place to be, why would I go anywhere else? And going to other places just really helps you appreciate things about home, helps you learn like, hey, oftentimes you'll find I really like these other places, there's some things that are better than where I'm currently at. And also people, sell you this vision of like, it's really scary. If you leave like Western Europe, America, Canada, like the world is like a scary place. But there's literally billions of people who live that way day to day. Well, of course, there are bad things happening all over the place to all sorts of people. But it's, still, I think, helps change your vision when you can go out and actually see stuff with your own eyes.
Yeah. How did you prepare well? How did you know which areas not to go into, which areas to go into? Did you have any bad hostel experiences?
Honestly, remarkably few. Um, it's kind of interesting. So we've traveled a ton and hadn't been like robbed until this past year. My wife had her purse stolen in Mexico City. Someone like really, uh, not like mugging, but just like distracted us by like doing something, and then at the same time stole the purse. Um, but so we had traveled for like, we did 6 months in South America, we did a few months in Southeast Asia, we did Europe, we did all these other places where people have stuff stolen. We didn't. And same with hostels. Like the worst things that happened were like, I don't know, people partying or people like trying to have sex in like a dorm room where you are, or something like that. Yeah. Again, was that the part of the question? Oh, how do we kind of know where to go? Yeah. So I remember going, it's kind of funny because I think my wife was a bit more adventurous. No, she definitely was. She wanted to go places and I was more of like, I don't know. So before we went to Southeast Asia, which was like my first time not being in like a kind of westernized, developed situation, I'd watched a show about people being like kidnapped in Thailand. I can't remember what the name of the show was, but like, so we got there and we were like in the little like backpacker zone of Bangkok. And it was like each day we'd like venture a little bit further out. Like, oh, we crossed the street. Oh my God, this is awesome. Like, oh, we went downtown. Wow. Like you feel this great sense of like productivity, even though you're basically doing nothing. But you're just kind of getting more and more comfortable. Like, oh, hey, we went out and people tried to scam us and like told us this thing was closed and it wasn't actually closed. And we like made it back safely. Cool. So we had that experience. And then yeah, we went to Colombia. I feel like, so we went to Colombia in 2014. Colombia, I think, is becoming an increasing more and more popular place to go as it moves from like this kind of narrative history around drug cartels towards like a more, people understand it as like a great place to, beautiful country, wonderful people, all this type of stuff. But I still going, like you read like the Embassy of Canada reports on Colombia, and it's like there's this thing called like express kidnapping where people in a taxi like kidnap you and take you to like an ATM and demand you take all your money. And so I remember like the first couple times we were like taking taxis, and this feels really embarrassing, but I had like my little like knife and I would like put my hand in my bag of my knife, just in case this turns into a kidnapping, like I'm ready to roll, which is really dumb. But yeah, I don't know, you get somewhere and you're like, okay, cool. Like this was ridiculous. Basically never read the government's reports on places. But then also really listen to people. We've had really the experience of you show up in a place, especially if you're staying at a hostel, which I think is an awesome thing to do. Especially like if you're not someone who likes being in dorm rooms, often hostels have private rooms, but there's just way more of a community vibe. And so like you'll get to, Buenos Aires, for example, and people will say like, don't go to La Boca at night, because if you go there at night, someone will rob you. And then you're at the hostel and people come back and are like, oh, I got robbed. And you're like, where were you? What were you doing? They're like, oh, we were like walking around La Boca. We had some drinks and then someone mugged us. And so I think once you go somewhere and start talking to people, usually there's a pretty clear demarcation of what's safe, what's not safe. Sometimes you can like push that a little bit because you'll go other places and people tell you like, absolutely don't go to this area. But then you go there and it's totally fine. But usually, yeah, you just go somewhere, you get to like, the place and people start telling you, okay, this is safe, this isn't safe. And if you listen to those people, you'll be fine. Another thing we like to do is just kind of prepare for the worst. So like we went to Carnival in Rio in Brazil, which is like known for pickpockets and muggings. And so people just say like, hey, when you're going out at night, just prepare as if that was going to happen to you. So don't bring like stuff that you'd be worried about if it got stolen. And then we did that, nothing ever happened. And so we were always happy.
Mm-hmm. That's a good recommendation, to talk to people. The way that I've traveled mostly has been having my little bubble. Like most people, I think the idea around fear is also the fact that like if I would travel alone, like would you recommend traveling alone?
I think it's like one of the best things you can do is to do some solo travel. It's not the most fun thing in the world, but I think it's just like such an incredible personal development experience. So yeah, highly recommend it. Obviously, it has like a solo female. There's more kind of things you have to be aware of. It's quite a bit easier as a dude. You can just be like, hey, I'm going to go somewhere and figure it out. But yeah, I think it's super valuable. You just, yeah, put yourself in so many new situations and you come away feeling, I think, just like a huge self-esteem boost as long as you can stick with it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm getting closer to the place where I agree. This past year, I've started traveling in the U.S. first. It's like your Bangkok experience. Okay, I'm gonna cross the street. I'm gonna do a little bit more now. Um, and the fun thing is that every single time that I do something more, I realize how it's entirely fine. Like I used to think that things would happen to me, like that I would have no control over things. Um, and it's very nice to realize that all you have to do is be observant and have your plans. Like whenever I was talking to Hannah, she was like, I have all of my plans. Like I know what I'm doing. I know my checklists. I know how I'm going about it. Um, and I think that that's definitely the way to do it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was interesting for me, so traveled a bunch with Amanda, and then I went on a month trip by myself to Czech Republic and a bit of Eastern Europe. And so Amanda's much more of the planner, and I'm more of like, we'll just figure it out guy. So I was there, and I had like one night in particular where I took a train to a different city. And then I was thinking I'm just going to show up at the hostel and stay there and then get there. And because it was like February, so not tourist season, like everything was literally closed. And so I'm like walking around, I don't have a phone, and I'm trying to find a place to stay, and all the hostels are closed. And then I eventually had to go to like a nice hotel, but I was able to negotiate with them because it was February, and negotiate the price down. But yeah, I think one of the things that's great about it too, especially if you're someone who's like, whether you live with your family or you've got like a partner, we kind of have these weak spots that we don't see because other people have strong spots. Like, for example, in our partnership, Amanda's like more of a planner, and sometimes I can take that for granted. And then I go out by myself and I'm like, oh, wow, like, you run into some issues when you don't have someone who's like, running your agenda. So I think that's cool. And I think that especially applies in social situations. Like our social kind of setups at home are really set up in a way that feels comfortable to us, where we might meet a new friend, but we almost meet a new friend through another friend versus being thrown into these social situations where, especially I'm a pretty introverted guy. So like going into like a hostel bar and just not knowing anybody and trying to start a conversation was really, really valuable and really helped me get out of my comfort zone.
I love that. So you mentioned that you went to the Czech Republic by yourself. Why? Like what made you want to go by yourself?
Yeah, it was really just this idea of I want to take a trip by myself. I think this would be a really cool adventure. And so I was like, where could I go? I have some money, I've got some time. And yeah, I just was like debating it one day and was like, I've been curious about this region. I wanted to go to Slovenia because I just had never met anyone who'd been to Slovenia. I was like, okay, cool. I can go to Prague. I heard a bunch of cool stuff about Prague, and then just take this adventure.
That must have been really rewarding. Bless you.
Thanks. It's allergy season here right now. But yeah, I think it was like one of those things where you definitely feel lonely at times, but you come away from it feeling just, like you've leveled up in life. Just that level of confidence of like, hey, I'm going to the airport. I'm going to like fly to a different country completely by myself. The first time you do it, you feel some stuff, but then afterwards, now I feel like if I go somewhere and I'm by myself, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to explore. I'm going to do stuff. I kind of know how to do it. But you don't get that feeling until you've gone out and done it yourself.
Mm-hmm. So how do you save for travel? Like what would be a good plan to save for actual travel? I imagine that domestic versus international is vastly different. So
Yeah,
what is...
I mean, I think this is one of the great secrets about travel is that it costs so much money just to live in like the US or Canada or Australia or Europe. There are so many places in the world where it is so much more affordable and you really don't have to save a ton of money. So this was kind of our experience. The first trip we did, we went to Europe for a while and then we went to Southeast Asia afterwards. I remember having this experience of we were going to Cambodia. And so we used the website Hostel World at this time. Hostel World was like, I don't know, TripAdvisor for hostels. It still exists. It's cool. You see ratings and reviews for every hostel. And so in Europe, we were paying like $45 a night to stay. It was hard to find hostel rooms for like staying in like a 12-person dorm room type thing. And then we go to Cambodia and we paid like $4 a night to get our own private room in a place there. And you're like, whoa, this is crazy. So yeah, it's a lot more affordable than you think, especially it's one of these questions of like, what are you trying to do? So if you want to take a trip to Great Britain, like you're going to need to save up a bunch of money. If you want to take a trip to Central America, you probably don't need to save up as much money. I think in terms of actually going about doing it, having a very fixed set goal in your mind, having an abstract goal of, hey, one day I want to go traveling, that's not going to do a whole lot for you. Because then we fall into these traps of like buying, you know, a nice coffee, going out for drinks with friends. Like it's remarkable if you're not really paying attention how much money you can spend day to day. But yeah, so I would say like get serious about where you want to go, really make it real. So say, hey, I want to take a trip to Argentina and this is how much hotel rooms cost and this is how much flight costs are and this is how much daily food costs are. So I have a clear picture of how much money I would need. And then also you start to think about, hey, I'm spending $50 on a meal with drinks with friends, and that could have bought me 2 nights at a hotel in X country. And it starts to become a lot more real and become a lot more helpful for savings. So yeah, that would be the biggest thing. I think, again, another cool thing as well with the world we live in today is just the ability to work and travel, which is something I'm really passionate about. So in that case, you need even less money, but just if you've got a job bringing in an income and you've got like an emergency fund to go somewhere and just set up shop for a month or 2 and use it as a home base and explore a bunch of other stuff can be great as well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, so I'm trying to decide if I go into the deep questions right now or ask you a couple more logistic questions. Which would you prefer?
I'm happy either way.
Okay.
It's your show.
I'll ask you one more logistic question and then we'll go deep. Okay, so you and Amanda. So y'all have been together much longer than I thought y'all had been together.
Yeah, we met in our second year of university, which was 2008, and we started dating in 2009. So that is 13 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what are your tips for a good relationship?
I definitely don't feel like I am a relationship expert. I think for me, getting a just better understanding of becoming a better individual myself has been important. And especially I think when you're young, you get into relationships and, you know, so many people have kind of a lower sense of self-esteem, don't have a great self-understanding, and you kind of use each other as crutches to like prop each other up, which isn't valuable. So it's, yeah, a process of always trying to work on yourself. I think there are definite skills involved in a relationship. So I think a pretty, you know, early on view I had was like, oh, you find someone you like and you're just, you know, you click like puzzle pieces and everything just works. But yeah, there's like definite skills. Like we've learned some stuff around communication that's been really helpful. And then also, yeah, it's just a process of growth. So I think that just in general in life today, we get kind of caught up in novelty. Like there's these trends to be like, oh, like as humans, we have urges to be like polyamorous or whatever. But I think the true like fruits of a relationship are things that happen over time, and it may not feel the same like, oh, this is like novel, you know, like the very first moment we met. but like having that like really strong, really deep connection of someone who you've known for a really long time and been a partnership with for a long time is something that's really awesome. I'm trying to think of any other specific tips. So I guess to get like really specific would be, one, like work on improving yourself and don't lose yourself into a relationship, which I think can be common. Like when you're younger, people have insecurities, and like, hey, I'm going to do stuff with my friends can cause issues or whatever. Two books that I think are really helpful for that would be like Six Pillars of Self-Esteem, I think is something that almost everybody should read. And then if you're a strong person with good self-esteem, you're just naturally going to end up with someone who's similar. And something I found helpful as well for us was the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, which has like a specific form of like how you should talk and navigate conflicts, which I don't actually love, but just like the general principles and thinking about it, things like not making judgments, speaking objectively, some of that stuff, if you start implementing it, really works almost like magic. So those are really helpful. And then I think the other thing would just be two really strong individuals make a great partnership. I think some people, it's easy to get this kind of like codependency thing going on, but things like, so for us, we were like, hey, we both want to take individual trips because we think this will be great experiences for us, and spending this time apart will be like interesting and help us like come back and appreciate the things about each other. And it did. Whereas I think some people get in situations where like one partner wants to do one thing, another wants to do another thing, and it causes either a blow up. But like a lot of times traveling, if I want to do something and Amanda doesn't want to do it, she says, I don't want to do it. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll go do it. And I'll come back and see you after. And it's perfectly fine. We ask each other how it was. But when we were younger, and I think in other situations, that can be like a point of tension where we feel like we need to do everything together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that whole, oh, you want to do it? I don't really. Okay, I'll go do it, and you don't have to. Like, it's not a buddy thing. It's I mean, in true form, a partnership. Like, you do things together, but y'all are unique individuals who have your own lives and who have your own interests. And I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, into the deep questions. So you had said in the very beginning the phrase, do the things that make you feel alive, right?
Yep.
What does it mean to feel alive?
So I feel like it's just waking up in the morning and feeling like, I don't know, kind of in love with being here. I think for me, I had that experience of just, I don't know, I didn't really like going to school. Like I never got like extremely negative about it. I felt like I had to do it. And so I wasn't even like, I felt like I had to do it, so I was forcing myself to do it. It was like, I felt like I had to do it on such a deep level that I didn't even question my ability. I never once thought like I could just not go to school. That never crossed my mind. So, but you kind of just get into a funk, right? And then, so we took that trip right after college. We went to Europe for a summer, and we're doing that like stereotypical backpacker thing. And it was just a ton of fun. Like I just would wake up day after day and be like, this is awesome. And it's like, yeah, partying in Europe when you're like 21 years old is a ton of fun. That's obvious. But I don't know, there's something of that sense of like, oh, life could feel like this. And so I think as I've done more stuff like that, I've realized, yeah, there's more deeper things. So if you're traveling for an extended period of time, you kind of realize that like you get kind of bored of traveling. You need to be learning things. You need to have a sense of purpose. And those are the things that are going to make you just feel like really locked in. So I think we can kind of relate to moments like this of people talk about being in flow, but maybe it's like surfing, or like you have a conversation with someone and you really connect, and, you just spend, like for me, I'll spend like 2 hours arguing about like, I don't know, economics or like political philosophy or something, maybe even 3 hours. It's like, I could keep doing that forever. I do not get tired while I'm doing it. Or things, I remember one time we did like a full moon ski trip. So you can cross country ski between two towns in that area that I was living in Canada. And so we went like on, at midnight through the night. And it's just like that thing that makes you feel like, wow, like I'm really alive, which is using the words to define the thing. But yeah, that's kind of how I would explain it. Like those experiences that just make you feel like time's kind of moving quickly and slowly. Like your energy is just not being taxed in any way, even though you're doing something difficult. Yeah. And then you just feel like really kind of aligned and like, this is what it's about, is kind of how I would try to describe it.
I love that explanation. I hadn't, like, I know the feeling in certain instances, but putting the explanation of both slow and fast, it's just like I can recall a couple of moments that I'm just like, oh yes. Like I know those moments, because the slow is you become extremely conscious of the moment. You're like, oh, I'm here. And that's the slow. And then the fast is just like, but then you know that in an instant it's going to be gone and it's going to be a memory. And it's like, it's kind of a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think one of the really cool things about travel, especially if you use it as a means to disconnect. So I think if anyone was doing this today, one of my biggest recommendations would be like, don't get a phone plan when you go to a new country. Maybe even don't even like put your phone somewhere or like buy a shitty phone, buy a burner phone, and just like don't use your phone to stay connected, because I think disconnecting is a really big part of it. But yeah, you go somewhere new and it's like time changes because you're in a new city. So like everywhere you're walking, you're noticing all sorts of things that you never notice, because you've integrated them into your experience day to day at home. And so yeah, you have this experience of like, wow, 3 months went by and it feels like I can't believe it's been 3 months, but also in another sense, like it's hard for me to think about how long ago 3 months was. Whereas at home, sometimes when you're just in the rhythm of work and life, a year can go by and you're like, whoa, how did that happen? It's almost like time long when you're kind of not in it. Long stretches of time pass really quickly, and short moments of time can feel really long. And the other experience is like, hell, I was having like a conversation with someone and like 3 hours flew by. But when I think about the past month, it feels like very detailed, like a ton has happened. I've been to like 4 different cities, had a ton of new experiences, that type of thing.
I've been thinking a lot about this concept of how much can you actually do in a certain given period of time, because like it will be a week or a month, and after that small period of time it feels like 2 years have passed or something ridiculous, and I look at how much I've gotten done, or if I'm super intentional about these things, it's crazy to see how much can actually happen in a short period of time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think too is it's important, like as you get older as well, and like you have like a kid, for example, and a job, like there's a certain like, I think sometimes we, especially through our popular culture, which is kind of like you see representations of marriage and parenthood and like having a stable career kind of continually represented in a negative way. I think those things are really valuable, even though, so when I'm saying like, hey, we get into these funks at home, I don't necessarily associate with that with, oh, you need to go traveling, like you should say no to a family, because I think all those things can be true if those are things that you like care about and are bought into. Because I think a story for a lot of people who go do these big trips is like, oh, I realized I kind of love having my friends around and living at home. And a lot of people who like never do it, it's kind of, they always live with that, like, oh, I should have gone and done this thing, in the back of their minds.
So you have settled down in Mexico, correct?
Yeah, mostly.
Mostly as in you're still traveling a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of more recently where we've been like, okay, like we've been here for more than 6 months. We've got another year of lease for the future. So yeah, pretty settled
so
down.
For a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why Mexico?
Yeah, Yeah, it's something that doesn't have like a simple, quick answer, but I came here for the first time in 2017. I think before that, I never really, once we started traveling, I was like, I got to go to Asia. For some reason, that was in my mind. And we've been to South America. So once we started working and traveling, we went to Asia. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about Mexico, I guess, just because people go here. And like, I thought when I was younger, like Mexico, beach, resorts, that type of thing. But yeah, so came for the first time in 2017, had heard a bunch of really good stuff about Mexico City, particularly through our podcast. So we'd interviewed a couple of people who were taking bigger trips. And we're like, oh yeah, I spent a month in Mexico City. And in my mind, I was like, what? Like you were, had all this time flexibility. You spent a month in Mexico City. What's that all about? And then, yeah, I just heard enough good things where I was like, okay, I need to go check this out for myself. And so I had started a job that required me to be on North American times. And so that limited options. And we got kind of tired in Asia of being, most countries in Asia either have 30 or 60-day visas. So like if you want to go work and travel Southeast Asia, you can go to Thailand for 60 days, you go to Bali for 30 days and extend it. You can go other places. And you kind of have to keep moving. And I was like, I want to go somewhere for like 6 months. And so Mexico typically allows you in for 180 days. They're being kind of weird about it right now. But we're like, okay, we can go to Mexico for 180 days. It's affordable. Heard great things about Mexico City. We went and just like immediately loved it. Had a great time. And so kind of got in this rhythm of like, we spent, a big chunk of the year in Mexico City. And then we left. And then the next year, still working, and was like, well, we could try to go to a different country, but there's so much more of Mexico we want to explore. It's one of those places where you come with a list of things you want to do that's like this big. And then after you leave and you're like, okay, I've been here for a year. And like my list is like twice as long as it was when it started. So yeah, it's just a country, I think, where we completely overlook it in Canada and the States. A huge country, super diverse, tons of people, tons of culture, incredible food, awesome natural sites, things to do. So yeah, we just kind of kept coming back because there was like more and more stuff we wanted to do. And then eventually last year, when all this stuff around the world was going down, it was one of the freest countries out there. So we got residency. And then once we decided we want to start a family, it was like, do you want to go back and set a shop in Canada, which would be kind of like moving somewhere new anyways, or we can decide to do that here. And it kind of had just, by that point, felt like a lot more home here than it did anywhere else. So yeah, that's kind of how we came to it.
Wow. So how has being a father been for you?
It's been good. I feel like it's one of those things that's kind of hard to just like describe simply. It's interesting, I think, the experience as a man, because you have this first moment of like, okay, we're going to have a baby. And then as a woman, you're like experiencing that for 9 months. And as a man, you kind of see your wife experience that for 9 months, but you don't actually like, nothing's really changed for you yet. And then the baby is born and it's here, and you kind of go through this big wave of like anxiety that comes along with that. But then, yeah, you kind of make it through it and everything's healthy. So how has it been? I think it's been awesome. Like it's been challenging at times. It's just kind of a whole different like orientation to life. So, but overall, a very good experience. One thing that going through this experience makes me think is I kind of feel like I could have done this earlier. I think it took me a while in life to get to the point where I'm like, okay, let's, start a family. But now that I'm here, I'm kind of like, well, we could have done this like 4 years ago. So I think as well, it's one of those things where our culture kind of pushes us to like not have kids or to have kids when you're older. And I kind of feel more like countercultural in that way.
Why? Like what makes you say that you probably could have, had kids earlier?
I don't know. It's just one of those things where like me at 26 was probably like, I need to do all of these things before I can have kids. But I think you never reach a point where you're maybe, I don't know if you're like make like $1 zillion at like a startup, and then you retire and you're like 24, and maybe you're like, okay, sweet, let me just like start a family now. But other than that, I think you never really reach a point where you're like, now is the perfect time to have a kid. And I think it's the type of thing as well where you can't take it for granted. Like so many people are having different like health and challenges related to that. So yeah, I think too, just coming to an understanding, I think like going through a phase of like growing up, you kind of hit a certain point where you start to realize the flaws of your own parents. And then you start to think like, oh, when I'm a parent, I'm going to be like the perfect parent. And then you also have to come to a realization of like, hey, I'm going to have flaws as a parent. And hopefully I can do this, what I learned from my own experience, and be mindful of that. But also just, yeah, realizing things aren't going to be perfect. And also, yeah, just some of these other experiences that we chase, it kind of relates to that thing we were talking about with relationships. We're kind of chasing novelty. Like traveling's awesome. I'm a big fan of it. I still do it. But it doesn't really compare to having a child. And I think sometimes we find ourselves like today, people like, we're trying to fill up these holes with like, oh, we're going to new restaurants, we're seeing the new movies, we're traveling, we're like going to like beach clubs or whatever. But some of the more like traditional things that people just did are the things that make you feel, you know, the most like alive in a certain sense, or just, yeah, make life meaningful.
That makes a lot of sense. I love that. That's so beautiful. It is true that a lot of culture says wait until you're a certain age until you have children. I don't know if I was talking to somebody or if I was watching something, I can't remember, but they were basically explaining the fact that like they waited until they were ready, quote unquote, and by the time that they were ready, like it was really hard for them. And there are a lot of issues today with a lot of fertility, and I don't know why that is. Like I don't know if it's something we're eating, if it's something health related. I don't know why it is, but I have seen a spike in that, and it's really interesting because also my parents, I've talked to them about this as well. And they're like, you're never really ready to have kids, but you become ready. Like the second that you have a kid, you become ready. It's like
Yeah.
throwing yourself into it.
Yeah. It's kind of like there's certain things that you think I ought to prepare for this, but the only way you prepare for it truly is by doing it.
Like travel.
Yeah. I saw, it was a funny, I think it might have been like a Babylon Bee thing of it was like mother of 3 completely regrets like being a parent because of the like climbing the corporate ladder she missed out on, which is, I mean, I think sometimes people kind of push that like, oh, like, you know, these gender roles, like you shouldn't even like care about a career. I do think there's a balance to it, but I think that like, I don't know, it's represented very on one side. It's kind of one of those things, like two extremes. Like in popular culture, it's represented this way of like, oh, you know, you should care about your career and both for men and women. But yeah, I feel like it's just like, it's an awesome experience to have. And I feel like more awesome people need to have kids to keep the world full of awesome people, you know?
I agree. One of the things that my family grew up doing, and I think it was kind of cultural because, so my mom's Mexican, and in the Mexican culture, like other people help you take care of your kids. You don't do it alone. And so growing up, we always had, you know, nannies or somebody to help. And that was really, really important. Like, I think that you only get to this place where you have to choose. And my parents did not make that much money whenever they were young. Like they were like 22, 23 whenever they had us. But like that was really important for them to both be able to do their stuff. So they made it a priority. And I think that's the question is like, you don't have to be perfectly ready, but it's the gives and the takes. Like what is important to you?
Yeah. And it's one of the gifts of technology too, that like the costs of entrepreneurship, like becoming an entrepreneur yourself, are so much lower, and we can do it from home and we can do it from other countries. So it's like you truly can, you know, make these things work. Like for us, like having a lot of work flexibility makes this so much easier. Like
oh my gosh.
not having to like leave and go to work, or for Amanda to have to like formally request a maternity leave or anything like that. Just being able to be like, well, you know, for her, it's like, I work for myself. I can just do whatever I want. So yeah, I think taking advantage of some of the things that we have available to us, like the ability to take on like personal projects and be an entrepreneur and freelance, makes a huge difference.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right. Well, I have some final rapid fire questions for you. They are like, just say the first thing that pops into your head, your gut response, I guess.
Okay.
Number 1, what do you value in life?
The first thing that comes to me is like relationships with people. I feel like that kind of stands out as like the most important thing.
That makes a lot of sense. Number 2, what is a good life?
I think a good life is just a life that you want to be living. It's not someone else's version of a life. So whether that's starting a family and like, you know, having a solid job, if that's what you want to be doing, it's doing that. And if it's not doing that, it's not doing that. So I think it's something that's really personal to people. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Number 3, what lights your spirit up?
I think like big, interesting ideas do. I feel like my family does. I notice myself just like looking at photos of our daughter and just like feeling like I could just do this all day, or like when she's around, I could just like watch her do stuff. So yeah, her big ideas, good music, road trips, adventures, like going new places, I'd say.
I love that. Okay. And last question. If you could leave only one piece of advice for the world and everyone else that comes after you, what would you say and what would it be?
I think it would be trust your ability to think. I think that so many of the problems we're running into right now come from this like idea that we can't think for ourselves, or that like we're like not blessed with like the ability to understand things unless we've been preordained by certain groups. So whether that's like you can't understand the current situation because you didn't have the correct degree, or whether that's like, what do you want to do in life? Are you just doing stuff other people have told you should do? Like whether it's because of a traditional set of values or like a modern set of values. But yeah, just make decisions for yourself, learn from your experiences, and do what you think is best for you, not what other people think is best for you.
That was a great last piece of advice. Thank you. All right. Well, we're wrapping this episode up. A reminder, episodes come out every Friday. I'm establishing a cadence, which is going to be awesome. And yeah, I hope that you all enjoyed this episode with Ryan Ferguson. Thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on.
Thank you.
I hope that you found this episode enriching. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you would like to write a rating or a review, that would be fantastic. You can also follow me at Igloo Podcast. I'm looking forward to our next episode. Cheers.